Hi there, and welcome to another interview. Today, I got the fabulous Brett Smith with me, and I'm going to ask Brett the same question I ask absolutely everybody. Hey, Brett, why did you become carnivore?
Hey, well, thank you so much for having me on the channel. I'm thrilled to be with you. It was a long evolution to getting to be a carnivore. Just to give a little bit of a backstory on all of this, I come out of the health insurance 20 years world and then transitioned into here in America, we would call the corporate wellness and disease management worlds, working with employers to try to fix all of their employee health situations. And I wound up finding myself quite overweight through years. And even in the 10 years of being in the health insurance, or excuse me, the wellness and disease management worlds, I was a certified health coach. I wasn't a practicing health coach, but I needed to have the same certification as our nurses that were able to coach with people because I had to fill out all the requests for proposals from the largest consulting and brokerage houses around the country. So they'd send me their 2,000, 5,000, 20,000, 40,000 employer groups to work with. So because I was always selling to MDs or health systems across the country would relicense our tools and private label them. And so I was always selling to their chief medical officers who ran all of the corporate wellness initiatives. So that was my world. And I had a short stint in pharma also, where I sold a couple of blockbuster drugs, two hard drugs, a sleep drug and a BPH drug. And that was kind of in between being an insurance broker and then getting into the corporate wellness world. Got back into that industry in another vertical, you could say. And so I found myself very overweight. And in 2018, at the end of October, at my sister's birthday party, 60th birthday party, my younger brother, who I hadn't seen in 4 months in that period of time, lost about 30, 35 pounds. And it caught me way off guard because I was at my heaviest ever in my life. And I'd been a college athlete and I've stayed a competitive athlete in tennis, a sport called pickleball, and another one not as well known called platform tennis. And I've always been able to hang my own, and I've been nationally ranked in a lot of these different things and still competing while having a great deal of weight on me. But it caught up with me with having 4 knee surgeries, 4 meniscus surgeries, 2 in each knee, and a lot of arthritis that came with that. And so I'm at the birthday party and my brother, I go, "What'd you do?" to my brother. And he goes, "Well, I've been doing this low carb keto thing." And it caught me really off guard because I had just spent, 10 years in the corporate wellness world. And I'm like, nobody's ever said that phrase to me before. I had never heard about keto. And I'm like, must be some fad diet that he's fallen into because I understand the clinical guidelines for all these things because I sell clinical guidelines. So must be something crazy. So I go the next day, play another national tournament. I'm in Milwaukee, go 90 miles south of Chicago, play this tournament, and I just fall on my face and realize I'm no longer functionally fat. The arthritis and the weight is just making it impossible for me to compete at a level that is acceptable to me. I come home completely, thoroughly disgusted with myself. And I reach out to my brother. I go, "Send me whatever you have on this stuff." And it wasn't a lot. And so I start paying attention to some of it. And it was mainly just keto at the time. So carnivore was still a distant thought. And some of the things that jumped out at me is people are saying saturated fat is actually healthy and that you don't have to consider LDL and unhealthy, a bad cholesterol. There is no such thing as bad cholesterol. And just from the worlds I had been in and around, I'm like, whoa, this sounds really far-fetched. This is some kind of a crazy fad diet that my brother found. And I'm like, I'll just because I'm used to selling lots of things, including science, predictive modeling algorithms, showing how they're built, go into the evidence-based model for how science is kind of categorized and what's the strongest evidence. And I'm sorry, I stumbled on saying that, and I still didn't say it well, but it'll come back to me. But anyhow, I'm just like, well, I'll go into PubMed and I'll find the definitive studies and the meta-analysis that show that saturated fat's going to kill him. And I didn't, an LDL you need to be aware of and fearful of. And because I didn't want my brother to be a skinny guy in a casket is really what it all kind of came down to. Because as I started learning, those two things jumped out at me in my first couple hours of deep diving. And so now I really deep dive to go find the definitive research, and I realize it's just not there. And we're dealing with a health system that's built on a foundation full of cracks everywhere. And it starts helping me put together in my brain what's going on. Why do we have 93% of Americans not considered metabolically healthy? Why are half of adult Americans pre-diabetic or type 2? Why, and we can go through 1,000 of those kinds of stats. And it's just, and I gave hundreds of PowerPoint presentations and meetings over GoToMeeting and all these different things showing the country with all the states changing colors as they became more obese, more diabetic. And that was my whole world. I lived all that, but I was slowly also gaining weight with all of that. And the three of us running these companies were all in the overweight to obese areas. And so it was just it caught me so off guard. So that led me to trying to understand, and one of the big epiphanies for me was I came across Dr. Stephen Phinney and Jeff Volek. And if you're familiar with them, and are you familiar with the person who won the triathlon, the billionaire that wound up funding Virta Health?
No.
So what happens is that about 12 years ago, there's this guy who owns a tech company just like Zillow, sells it to Zillow. He's now a tech billionaire, lives in San Francisco, and he's a endurance athlete freak. And he's, won and competed in these Ironman competitions, triathlons, and he qualifies and goes to Hawaii. He comes back after winning the 50 and over world title at the #1 triathlon in the world and finds out he's so pre-diabetic, he's almost type 2. And it freaks him out. He goes, I'm the healthiest 50-year-old in the world. How can I be this messed up? And he figured out he was insulin resistant, and that was driving it. And all the carb loading he had been doing, because that's what the marathon people believe in, what caught up with him. So he deep dives like I did now 8 years later, and he's finding Vinny and Volek, who I find, and he goes and creates a company. And they make their chief medical officer and a doctor out of the University of Indiana, Purdue, who is doing a major obesity and diabetes study with people, and also went down the whole rabbit hole of why is all this happening, and came to, it's a story really about refined carbs and that taking over too much of the consumption of what we're eating. And she does a TED Talk that I found, and this was really the one big epiphany that hit me in November 2018, where it's a TED Talk called "To Reverse Diabetes and Obesity, You Have to Ignore the Guidelines." And I'm like, that was my world. I sold the guidelines. That's where I lived. And I'm like, oh my God, I just spent 10 years in an industry that shouldn't even exist. We should all be in a disease reversal industry, not in a disease management. All that does is prop up lots of office visits, lots of medications that most people don't need if you teach them the right information. So I started in December slowly pulling all of the processed carbs out of my world, and decided, well, 1/1 is right around the corner. I will do a New Year's resolution, and I'm going to lose all this weight, and I'm going to practice all that I've been learning. And I jump in and I lose 115 pounds in January, from January to September. And I keep going down this rabbit hole as deep as I can go. And I'm 38 pounds down in 6-7 weeks. And it's just like, I'm starting to look like I could maybe even get back into this industry, because I was not a poster child for the wellness industry. I did not look like even though I was an athlete, I didn't look like one. And so I reached out and I got a couple interviews, and within 2 days got an offer from another company in the disease management world, and I'm accepted. And I'm so fired up because I'm like, I'm going to go change the world. Because most people that I was talking to inside of the industry, as I was reconnecting after being out doing another durable medical equipment thing for a couple of years, a startup I did, I realized it was all, when I was talking to them on the phone, I could hear it. They were all like deer in headlights. They didn't understand anything I was talking about. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm ahead of the curve. No wonder I'd never heard of this thing. They still haven't heard of it. And I left in 2014, that world, and it was now end of 2018, early 2019. And I'm like, I'm still way ahead on all of this. And the company that hired me was excited because I was ahead, and they thought Virta Health was one of their main competitors out there. And so they brought me in thinking I would help bring them up to speed a little bit with all of this. And so I'm all fired up, and I'm pacing in my office because I'm so excited at this moment. And I'm saying to myself, I go, in like 4, 5, 6 more months, I'm going to be thin again. And I'm not on a diabetes medication. I'm not on a blood pressure medication. And I was about to say in my head that I'm bulletproof. I'm going to live forever as much as we can. And it hit me. I had another epiphany, just like watching the Dr. Sarah Hallberg video about, ignoring the guidelines, that was such an epiphany. And I had a second epiphany because now the founder of Virta Health with his diabetes story. And when I first went to college, I graduated high school 81. I'm 61 years old. And while I was playing on the college tennis team, my roommate from high school was on the track and cross country teams. And the number one selling book in the bookstores was by the author Jim Fixx, The Complete Book of Running. And there was a workbook that went with it that he was loading all the carbs that he ate at the food service on campus so he could have all the glycogen storage for the next workout tomorrow. And then it hit me, not only did the guy who wins the Ironman almost test out at type 2, but I remembered 20 years earlier, Jim Fixx died at 52 years old of a heart attack on a 5K run while looking like an Adonis. And I'm just like, I know better than this. I can't make those thoughts that I'm going to be bulletproof or anything. I need to go and put myself through some secondary screenings and see exactly where I'm at. 10 years earlier, because I was 55, 6 years ago at this time, I'd had at 45, a CT heart scan as part of when I was selling the corporate wellness protocols. We find the people at risk. We recommend they go to get a CT heart scan, verify if you have plaque. And if you do, we're going to try to work you through what we used to think would help, which never really helped anybody. But anyhow, so I'm just like, well, I'll go get it. So I self-referred myself for another $50 CT heart scan at the local largest health system in the state. 2 days later, they call me back. Mr. Smith, instead of having the 0 score that I'd had at 45, I now have a score of 268. And I'm like, I'm smack dab because 100 to 400 is intermediate risk, over 400 is high risk. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm closing in on high risk. I've done damage in the last 10 years. I have plaque. And so now, instead of just being obsessed with learning all of this, because I did just keep learning. I put hundreds of hours, 60 and just in October, November, all of my free time. And then it just became an obsession to figure out what's going on with all of this. But now I had a new goal. Instead of saying, I want to be thin again, and now I understood my why, because everybody has to have a why if you're going to make changes that come into either habits that are terrible for you and or potential sugar addiction that you're going to have to battle and overcome. And if you don't have a strong enough why, and maybe somebody helping guide you through it, you just might not get across the tape at the end of the race. And so now I'm like, okay. So I early on in that first initial deep dive, excuse me, my nose is itchy for some reason today. I came across, I'm sure you know who this is, Ivor Cummins, the Fat Emperor. And just on the island across the bay from you guys. And he taught me so much in those first 2 months about insulin resistance and everything going on with all of this. And I knew he had this podcast that focused, and he was the president of the Irish Heart Awareness Foundation charity. And his podcast was all about heart health. And they had done the documentary, The Widowmaker, and all of these things. And so I started paying attention to everything that Ivor put out online. And about 4 weeks, 3-4 weeks after I got my results saying that I've got atherosclerotic plaque, there was a guest that really also was another major epiphany for me, because if one, it's a small world, I knew who this person was. he was on the wellness committee at Wausau Papers. And when 8 years earlier, or 10 years earlier, I sold them their corporate wellness program. And the story is that Ivor had him on because he figured out through 16 hours, and he's got 2 PhDs. His name is Patrick Tewitt, and he was in Wisconsin. I think he's in Michigan now. I might be wrong with that. But he had a much higher score. He had a score closer to 1,000 CAC score, and he reversed it. He went to a 3-day executive physical, as he tells the story, at the Mayo Clinic, because all the people that came out of his undergrad all went to med school. He went down the PhD route, and some of them are still friends of his, and they're running this executive physical thing at Mayo. And they said, come and do this. And so he did. And at the end of that 3 days, they go, we prodded you and probed you and done every test imagined. Before you go home, is there something else you'd like to do? He goes, I've heard about these CT heart scans. Do you have them here? And they're like, yeah, we do. But we haven't done that, but we'll do that, He does the scan. He goes and showers. He comes out of the locker room, and they grab him. And instead of sending him on his way with lunch, they take him into a conference room and say, they bring up his scan on the TVs and are showing him. And they're like, you're going to die soon. You need to go and enjoy your life. There's nothing we can really do. And this is Mayo Clinic, one of the premier medical places in the world. And this is more like around 2002, 3 years before he wound up becoming the god that he is from a scientific understanding standpoint of what's causing all of this. And so they're like, move to California, divorce your wife, sell surf wax, and enjoy your last couple of years. And he's a problem solver, because that's what his job with his PhDs that he did at Wausau Papers was all about. And he wound up just spending 16,000 hours over the next 5 years going through every paper that has to do with heart disease and all the factors associated with everything. He comes down to, this is really a gut microbiome thing. And the diet plays a heavy role in this. It took him a while to really get to that the vitamin K2 and MK4 and MK7 have a lot to do with all of this. But he reversed his calcium score down to 0 after being just, 4 or 5 times what I had. And so I'm watching this and I'm going, well, God, I'd learned 5 months earlier that you can reverse type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and all these other things. And I figured and metabolic syndrome, because I knew that was part of it, but heart disease is part of metabolic syndrome, and all the risk factors that build into it are all part of the same thing. So you must be able to do this. And I go, well, here's the protocol. So I started implementing the protocol. And he was like, Patrick's like, well, ketosis is a huge part of all of this, because this is the way that we're designed to run and live. And I'm just like, well, that's awesome, because I've already down, by this point, 55 pounds, 60 pounds. And I go, well, I can handle ketosis. I've been doing this. I can do this for the rest of my life. And so I started following the rest of the protocol. Fast forward, the boss who hired me at the disease management company says, Brett, we're going to go to California, because between you and me from our past lives, we've got the best relationships with the brokers and consultants out there. So we plan a week-long trip in Southern California to go talk to all the large brokers and consultants to get them to quote our programs. And on the 3rd day, he goes, well, you can either choose to come with me. I've got another appointment with this guy who created a blood test that tells you about your soft plaque in your arteries. And I came across this blood test at a conference last month. I'm thinking of sharing it with my wife, who still works in the corporate wellness industry for her company. And I had told him already about my CAC score right after he hired me, and he went and got one, found out he's got a score too, and he's 6 years younger than me, and he was a little freaked out, so he had a vested personal interest to understanding this. So I go, well, I'm going to want to come with you, because all I do is geek out on heart disease stuff. This is how I spend all of my time. And he goes, I knew you wouldn't be able to stay away. So we go and meet with Dr. Harrington from the Pulse, P-U-L-S, cardiac test company. And he explains Jim's results to him. And I just sit there for like 30, 40 minutes, which after hearing me talk now, you're going to say, right, you can never shut up and sit still that long without talking. But the doctor turns to me after he's done reading Jim his report and says, "Do you have any questions?" And I go, "Well, let me just see if I understand this perfectly. You're saying you created a venipuncture blood draw, which shows the soft plaque, which the CT hard scan can't show. And we know it's the soft plaque, which is the first part of this whole development. And it's a soft plaque that doesn't heal properly. That becomes the calcified plaque. And you now have a blood test which shows this." Because in my corporate wellness world, I sold hundreds of thousands of blood tests to employers. And this was part of our whole predictive modeling algorithm and stuff. He goes, "Wow, that's a great elevator speech. You really boiled that down well." And so he goes, "That's exactly what we do." And I'm like, "You have a phlebotomist on staff?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Do you want one of these?" And Jim goes, "Yeah, Brett had a CT hard scan. He's got a 268 score." And the doctor looked at me like I should be aware or worried. And I go, "I'm well aware." And I go, "So I want to see this because I understand where I am from a calcified. I don't understand my soft plaque yet." So they do it 2 weeks later. We do a Zoom call, the three of us together, and go through my results. And the doctor's like, "Well, you already knew that you had the calcified plaque, so there's no shock to you that this shows." And it also gives a heart age. And it gives me a heart age. And at the time, because this is, 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago now, 6 years ago right now. And he's like, and I'm 57, 56, 57. He goes, "You've got the heart of an 83-year-old. And I'm like, that was hard to hear. He goes, "But there's great news." Because the thing I forgot to say in the elevator speech recap is this test also shows whether you're in a healing process or your disease in a continued progression process. The NIH put this, through the paces and did final testing on all this, endorsed it, and said this is amazing. And so he goes, "So Brett, I got to tell you though, I wish we could have done one of these 9 months ago when you first started this keto thing, because at this point in time, I'm now down the 115 pounds. And he's like, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it because you're healing. You're in such a..." So he goes through the markers that show that I'm in total healing mode. And so I'm like, "That's awesome." I've been following protocol because I told him, I think I have a protocol to reverse out this stuff. And when I was in his office in Orange County, California, he just looked at me goofy like, "You think you can reverse this calcified plaque?" Because he still wasn't even up on this as deep as he was into all of this science about everything. He hadn't found Patrick yet. And I'm just like, well, this is not shock to me. I was hoping to hear exactly what you just said, and I'm going to stay my course. And so I just keep deep diving and the heart disease, and I keep following Ivor. And there's 2 months later, a cardiologist from Australia who's done more CT heart scans than anybody else in Australia. And the guy starts raving about this pulse cardiac test, that it can show early plaque and it can, shows progression. I'm like, wow, that's the test I just had. And so I've got a buddy of mine who's a cardiologist that I grew up playing tennis with, and we were playing pickleball that last summer. And his brother who's on the court's like, "Brett, did you hear about Ryan's heart attack?" And I'm like, my skinny cardiologist buddy just had a heart attack. And long and short of it, because it's too long of a story to not go long and short of it, honestly, because we're not going to get this done in an hour if I go this deep. But I've known them since they were 13 and 10 years old, and I was 16. And their dad died when they were in high school, and there isn't a male in his name's Dr. Ryan Cooley, cardiologist. And they don't have any male all the way back to the potato famine in Ireland that has lived past the age of 58. They've all died of heart disease. And so that's why Ryan became a cardiologist when he went into med school and went through the fellowship and everything. And he considered himself in his 20s a heart patient just because of all of this. And so I'm like, well, what are you going to do different? Because I'd found this protocol and all. And this is now in between what I'd had, the pulse cardiac test that I just told you about. It's halfway between. And I go, what are you going to do different now because of all this? I'm like, I'm waiting for the cardiologist to say he's up on what I found and everything. And he goes, well, Sean, my brother's already pretty much vegetarian. We both decided to go vegan and tackle this that way. And I'm like, okay, I can understand why you would think that. reading of the literature and protocol of people that I found that have reversed calcification, doesn't go that way. So I start sharing studies with him, and over the next couple months, it starts messing with his brain because he's starting to realize much of the cracks in the foundation I described earlier are existing. So after I got back from California, and which was the end of August, and now it's November 2019, I'm playing in a platform tennis charity event, and Dr. Cooley's there, and he goes, "Brett, come over here. I got to come clean with you." 3 months ago, I went to see the leading lipidologist in the state, $500 an hour, 2-hour minimum appointment. We did a 4-hour meeting. And when we got to diet, and I said, I've got this knocked out. I'm a vegan now for the last few months. I don't eat meat, fish, and egg. And she goes, "Why are you not eating meat, fish, and egg, the most bioavailable, nutrient-dense foods you can possibly put in your body?" And he goes, "But I eat all the healthy grains." And that day when I first talked to him on the court, he was sitting on the side of the court pulling Wheaties, breakfast cereal, out of a cereal baggie. I'm like, "Why are you eating that? Are you a diabetic or something?" Because that's the number one real risk factor when you really jump into heart disease. And he goes, "No, I'm not diabetic." Well, anyhow, so she winds up kind of hitting him in the gut and in the heart and the brain with all this. And he goes, "You're starting to sound like my friend Brett." And she goes, "Well, who's he?" And he goes, "Well, he's been a tennis buddy of mine for 40 years, but he's been in healthcare sales his whole life." And she's like, "Isn't it interesting that the salespeople can figure this out, but all you cardiologists have no clue what's going on with your own personal heart disease and your patients?" And this again just hit him. So he immediately started changing his diet to more how I was doing the low carb ketogenic thing, so she did blood tests. 6 weeks later, he did more blood tests. He goes, "Brett, I haven't had blood tests this good after 6 weeks of going keto since I was 25 years old." And so he's like all in, kind of believing in this. And long and short of it, I go, wow, I just started writing a guide because so many people thought I had cancer or was dying because I lost so much weight. And I don't have the 30 hours because I couldn't explain it as quick and simple as I can now. But even so, enough to just, if I'm not coaching and working with somebody, I can't just verbally vomit on them for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours to give them this. And it's going to sound crazy anyhow. You got to back it up with all the research and everything so they have something to grab onto and hold onto and believe in. So I had started writing a guide, you can call it. It turned into a 68-page PDF, which kind of goes through my story, who I found, Ivor and all these other wonderful people out in the world, Finney, Volek, and Hallberg, and 100 more. And quotes the science and the books. And I give it to him a couple months later when it's ready to kind of be shown. He gets it approved by the system he's working at, because he strips out all the research and everything and shrinks it down, but gets it approved, starts handing it out to all of his heart patients. And he's like, "I've never had success in my last 20 years of being a cardiologist like I'm having with sharing this information." He winds up moving to Provo, Utah, leaving Milwaukee here. And we stay in contact through all of this. And we decided this last November to start a podcast together. And we're doing it. It's called The Metabochondriacs. I have a separate podcast of mine called My Metabolic Life, which goes with my website, mymetaboliclife.com, for my coaching business that I do. And we are going down the rabbit hole of how this is all about metabolism and mitochondria health and dysfunction. And I was going to turn this guide a couple of years ago into a book on ketosis, but I've come to the realization that, well, it's not just all the metabolic syndrome things. You start paying attention to Metabolic Mind YouTube channel and .org, and that you can reverse Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia with the ketogenic diet. You can make major improvements with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. You start throwing red light, which is also just a metabolic therapy for what it does to your mitochondria and increased ATP generation and healing of the body. All of these things are metabolic therapy. So I'm in the process of creating a metabolic therapy book. I'm right now turning that 68-page PDF guide into 50 different blog posts on my website, which will take me another month to do. And that's kind of the elevator speech for the most part of, as much as I can make it an elevator speech, of my last 6-year journey. So now I'm out of corporate America. I'm coaching people. I've got some great success stories, 2 of my, and if you'd like to interview any of them, they'd love to come on your podcast. But both of them, Gene and Pedro, have been on No Carb Life, sharing their stories of, again, Pedro found me on a Facebook cardiac page and saw my results and reached out to me. And in 4.5 months, he dropped 65 pounds, reversed his gout, reversed 4 other conditions, and we pretty much silenced the fear of the heart disease growing further. I have a new client that's just from May of this year, and in the first 5 weeks, she reversed her 20 years of rheumatoid arthritis, where she was walking hunched over using canes, and now she's cane-free, walking straight up, walking like a teenager again. Before I found her, she had been on a GLP-1 by the name of Wegovy and dropped 120 pounds, but it stopped working after a year. And the insurance stopped paying for it, and was $1,000 a month medication. So she tried going off of it, seeing how it wasn't losing anymore, but she immediately put 20 on. I meet her 4 or 5 months later, and she was back on it to stop regaining. And I'm like, well, she explained that she was on this. I go, well, do you realize that that just is because of your old diet didn't allow you to make the GLP-1, but if you eat a proper diet, you're going to make all the GLP-1 you want in the world. And it's just going to take a few weeks to a month or 2 to resolve all of this. Within 2 months, she was off of the GLP-1, no weight regain, all the satiety mechanisms, working perfectly, and the hormones coming around. Within 2 more weeks, she's off of an SSRI and a thyroid medication. I mean, and daughter, who's a nurse, is now moving into all of this as well. So those are the kinds of, it's just the coolest thing in the world. You can sell I used to feel like I was making a difference selling corporate wellness programs, but we never reversed one person's diabetes, because medication can't do that. We never reversed one person's heart disease, because pills can't do that. Surgery can't do that, because if you keep fueling the fire keeps burning, and the insulin resistance manifests into these other 30 different conditions in your body. So that's kind of my story. I'll pause there and just see if there's anything you wrote down that was interesting, or anything you'd like to deep dive into more.
Well, that was brilliant. Firstly, Brett, that was absolutely amazing. Yeah, there's tons there, and I think you might be one of those returning guests, actually. Would you be okay to share a little bit of the protocol that you mentioned?
For the heart disease?
Yes.
Absolutely, and I share it with everybody who wants it. So if anybody just emails me at brett@mymetaboliclife.com, I get a couple of these now because people have great follow-up question. I should have said that in my story. But yeah, so when Patrick first said it on Ivar's Fat Emperor podcast in 2019, I then became obsessed with following every place that Patrick was on, because it wasn't like an easy to follow protocol. And so it took me hours and months to kind of get everything perfectly. And then I found a presentation he made with some charts, and I recorded, I wrote it all down, and I took screenshots of the presentation to use in a document, and it spells it all out. So really the first level of it, and this is so perfect because it answers in these different Facebook communities out there for coronary artery disease. Some people are like, you don't have to be in ketosis, and you can do this as a vegan vegetarian. Maybe possibly because you can. Virta Health has proven that you can reverse the type 2 diabetes with a vegetarian approach and even a vegan approach. But when you think about it, to kind of stay in that sweet spot of medical strength ketosis of 20 carbs or less a day, it's so hard to do when you're eating nothing but carbs. You're gonna get hungry. But with tofu and other different things that they use for their protein, they can try to do this. But being in nutritional ketosis is rule number 1. Rule number 2 is, most of what we're growing these days on the factory crop farms out there with all the fertilizer and not re-putting the nutrients back into the soil, and understanding the principles of regenerative agriculture that we've used our whole life up until the, Monsanto and all those took over. It's just, there's almost no nutrition actually in these vitamin or in these vegetables and fruits that you're eating. And if you're eating more monogastric chicken and pork type things, you still get nutrition, but it's the beef where it's gone through the whole fermentation process through the whole forward chamber. But so because we don't get enough, you might need to supplement with a certain list of supplements, and vitamin K is at the top of that. But you don't necessarily have to keep supplementing through time, because if you're eating a more proper human diet, and that could be still a ketogenic diet with 20 carbs, you can have some broccoli, asparagus. Hopefully it's all organic and things like this. I do a lot of fermented kimchi and sauerkraut because that's instrumental in this. So even though when I'm carnivorish, I still have sauerkraut. There are certain things I still do from a ferment side of the equation, but you need to get then tested after you've made sure you've gotten some quality supplements, because there's a lot of garbage out there in the supplement world that also, just like the food you're eating might not be bioavailable, a lot of the supplements you might be taking are not bioavailable either. But you take them for 3 to 6 months, you go get the blood test, you find out how all these levels are in the body, and if your diet can maintain and support all of that. But there's other pillars of cardiac success. So the other things are proper sleep. And as you start going down sleep architecture, and you have to understand that what we're doing right now, the blue lights in the TV, in our computer screens, in our phones, in our flat panel TVs, they're destroying us. Yeah, you can't do anything with that at night. And and if you're going to, you better have some orange tinted blue light blocking glasses. You got to fix your circadian biology. You need to get out in the morning, put your feet in the damn grass, and look east in the morning and look west in the afternoon, and get the sunset and the sunrise in your eyes. There's and I've gone 1,500 hours down just the whole quantum biology aspect with the whole Jack Kruse stuff. And you got Dr. Sarah Pugh in the UK there, who's just amazing. And if you haven't had her on, you need to have her on. She's incredible. And so that's a part of it. You need to manage stress. This was one of my big problems between work stress and just stress of life. We'll just say I had some marital stress because I did get divorced a little over 3 years ago. And so that wasn't perfect for a long time. And a lot of my stress was managed at night with eating bad stuff. And that's where my weight really came from. It wasn't from looking at what I ate through the day. It was that kind of garbage stuff. And then not having good stress management. So you have to manage your stress, which also helps you manage your sleep. And you have to do some forms of exercising. Resistance training is imperative. Some HIIT training. Stay away from this long, super hard cardio stuff, because the excessive oxidative stress, which comes out of all of that, is going to wreak havoc on you. Do the short bursts. Do a 15-minute level 2 cardio on an elliptical, or just sprint 100 yards, walk 100 yards, sprint 100 yards, walk 100. But don't start sprinting if you haven't sprinted right away. You got to build into these things. Jog the first 300 yards and then just go half out. So there's ways to do it. You can hurt yourself because we all come as couch potatoes and start now thinking we're going to become warriors again. And you got to work your way into being a warrior. So those are the cornerstones of it. There's more to it, but I'm happy to talk it through with anybody and share it with them. Yes.
Well, that's a fabulous answer. And I'll put all your links in the description so we don't have to spell it all out online. It will be in the description. Even on the audio podcast, the links will be there. So, Brett, we like to do a 45-minute maximum time here. So I'm going to thank you for your time. And I do get a feeling there'll be some comments saying, please get this guy back. So we'll get you back. And we'll talk to the people you mentioned as well. If you can hook me up with them, that'd be great.
I'll hook you up with everybody who I follow. And because we just need to get this out to the world. This is so fixable if the world pays attention.